Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Veterans Memorial Park. And welcome to the groundbreaking for Phase 1 of Veterans Memorial Project. I'd like to I'll explain about Veterans Memorial Project in just a few minutes. But the first phase of this project is the Four Chaplains Memorial. We're telling the story of heroic actions of the four chaplains, Lieutenant A.D. Good, Lieutenant G.L. Fox, Lieutenant C.V. Poling, and Lieutenant J.P. Washington. And we're also telling the story of Coast Guardman Charles David Jr. At this time, I'd like to introduce a very special person who has traveled to York, Pennsylvania, and it is an honor and pleasure to introduce Bill Kimmer, who is the Executive Director for the Four Chaplains Memorial Foundation, and he's also a Master Sergeant with the U.S. Army retired. And he is going to tell us from the national perspective about the Four Chaplains.
Thank you. So being a former high school and middle school teacher, you always have more material you need. And I did write a short little speech, but before I do that one, because really most of it was on Charles W. David, but let me tell you a little bit about the Four Chaplains real quick. So during World War I, the Army realized they didn't have enough chaplains. So World War II, they're trying to get a chaplain for every 3,000 soldiers going off to war. So it was done on purpose that they went out and recruit. And Rabbi Good, coming out of this community, that was a big lift because the Jewish community had to support the families when those chaplains went off. So when they let a Jewish rabbi go off to war, that was a big deal. But the chief of chaplains was trying to capture the three main religions in the United States: is Protestant, and if you know what Protestant is, they throw everybody Lutherans, Baptists, Methodists, Episcopal. You're all thrown into the Protestant bucket, all right? So you got Protestant, the Catholic, and then the Jewish religions were the three major religions. So when they put this team together, they did it on purpose. They were trying to build an interfaith team. So when they got on that ship in Staten Island on January 23rd, 1943, on his 12-day journey to Greenland, they did what chaplains are supposed to do. Chaplains, I served 30 years in the military as a chaplain assistant. Chaplains are different. They're called by God to serve. And those in your community are called by God to serve in your local churches, synagogues, mosques. But when you go into the military, that calling is a little bit even different, because you're going off to war with no weapon. You're going off there with your faith. So they have to stand out, and they did. So on this 12-day journey, the soldiers and airmen and everybody else on that ship noticed these guys were different than them. So you think about it. This ship represented pretty much our whole military. 902 personnel get on this ship, about 600 newly enlisted. We don't have the Army Air Force at the time. We have Army Air Crew on there. You have Marines, you have Navy gun crew, you have Coast Guard members, merchant mariners, and 150 Department of Defense civilians, contractors, electricians, plumbers, and they're going to Greenland for a purpose. They're building an airfield and weather stations, and they're building it there because about 18 months before the invasion, the D-Day invasion. So it's kind of our jumping off point. So most of these soldiers, newly enlisted, when they get there, their next assignment is going to be Europe. So I didn't join the Army to jump into the water, so none of these soldiers did either. So unfortunately for them, after they make one stop in Newfoundland, they head towards Greenland. This one is good and bad to have young people serve. The good thing is they're very heroic and take high risks. The bad thing is they sometimes don't listen to adults that much, and even though the captain told them the danger point is when we get close to Greenland, that's where the submarines will be, and he actually said, we've picked up submarines in the area. Most of these young men, we've gone 11 days on this ship. There's been no problem. A couple more hours, and literally it would have been a couple more hours, they'd been fine. If they got to daylight, they would have had air cover, and the ship would have been fine. But the small little convoy, the Dorchester, 2 supply ships, and 3 Coast Guard cutters at 12:55 in the morning on February 3rd, 1943, runs into this wolf pack of German submarines. And they target always the largest ship. So this is going to be the largest loss of life of a troop carrier during the war. The 902 on board, we're going to have 672 Gold Star moms in the next 17 minutes. And this is when I travel around the country when I was with the National Guard Bureau and talked to chaplains. This is when your faith comes into the play. In 17 minutes, you cannot decide who you are at that moment in life. You better know who you are, and these 4 chaplains knew exactly who they were. You know, Rabbi Good knew exactly what he had to do at that moment. You know, Father Washington, Poling, and Fox, our Protestant chaplains, knew exactly what they were supposed to do. And they were supposed to give hope to these young men. So they encouraged them to at least jump into the water and try to save yourselves. So that's what many of them did. Most of them shouldn't last less than an hour. Some lasted several hours. And a lot because of what these 4 chaplains did. So at the end, why it became such a big story was at the end, these 4 chaplains make a conscious decision to give up their life jackets to the last 4 individuals on the ship. And then they linked arm in arm, and they sang and they prayed as the ship sank. And why do we know this? Because after the sinking of the Dorchester, the chief of chaplain's office went and interviewed the 230 survivors. And they asked them 4 questions, 2 of which were, where were you when you left the ship? And did you actually see this act of selfless service? And enough of them did that in the 1960s, led by the American Legion, they were trying to give these 4 chaplains the Medal of Honor. It turns out the rules at that time in Congress, it wasn't a battleship, so they couldn't get the Medal of Honor. So under President Eisenhower in 1960 tells Congress, you come up with a medal, the same level as the Medal of Honor, we want to give it to the family of these 4 chaplains. So they came up with this Medal of Heroism. We call it the 4 Chaplains Medal of Honor. So in January 18th, 1961, up in Fort Myer, right above Arlington National Cemetery, they presented the families with this medal. So the story was kind of a big deal. Why we're here in Pennsylvania, why is the office in Philadelphia? Because of Clark Poling. His dad, Daniel Poling, served in World War I as a chaplain, World War II. And he, at that time, if you didn't know this, but on the campus of Temple University, was founded by a Baptist minister. The largest Protestant church in the United States was on that campus in the late 40s, early 50s. And Daniel Poling, the father of Clark Poling, happened to be the pastor. So they went to him, and it happened to be a group of Jewish businessmen from New Jersey, went to him and said, we want to capture this story and build a living monument, and that's where they built the original Chapel of 4 Chaplains. And they were never trying to build a congregation. Their idea was to build a place where people could meet and gather and share their different faiths. So they actually had an altar that would rotate between a Protestant, a Catholic, and Jewish service. And they held a lot of memorial services and stuff. Eventually that building was renovated. We're now on the old Navy Yard in Philadelphia. But I want to share my comments, and I'm going to gear it a little bit towards you have the 4 plaques, but you have a 5th one, and let you know why. So it's titled Lest We Forget. So in 1989, when I enlisted in the Army Chaplain Corps as a chaplain assistant, the 4th chaplain story was on the cover of a periodical. Many of you here are old enough to know Reader's Digest. So they used to come to our house. I was very familiar with the story during my 30-year career. I used the story to challenge chaplains to live their calling from God. In order for chaplains to be successful, they must be grounded in their faith. When the USAT Dorchester was torpedoed, the ship sank in less than 30 minutes. The 4 chaplains knew exactly who they were and what they needed to do at that moment. When I taught officer candidate school, I used the story to encourage officers to embrace their chaplains when they became commissioned. I'd always tell them, chaplains bring something to the fight that no other officer or soldier does. They bring hope. Even in the beginning of this nation, President Washington knew the value of chaplains and immediately added them to our nation's army. On July 29th, we'll be celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Army Chaplain Corps. This is the 2nd oldest branch in the U.S. Army after the infantry. I also use the story when training chaplain assistants. You see, when the chaplain enters a room, they have an insignia which identifies them. Either it's oftentimes a Christian cross or a Jewish tablet. But chaplain assistants they're only known through their actions. Nothing on the uniform tells them they're in the chaplain corps. It's all based on their actions and their relationship to that chaplain. I believe this is what makes the unit ministry team so strong. You have a chaplain who goes into war without a weapon, but only their faith, and the assistant who swears to protect him or her, and they have to lead by example. So as you celebrate the York Monument to the 4 chaplains, you added a 5th panel. You really captured both elements of selfless service. You see the 4 panels depicting the 4 chaplains will tell the story of the 4 men who were called to serve by God. The 5th panel will be an example of everyone else who selflessly steps up to help others. So I really think the 5th panel represents the rest of us. In the military, 10% of your force are officers, less than 1% are chaplains, 90% are enlisted. So we're kind of more representative. Charles W. David represents most of the other people. You see, Stewart's mate, first class, Charles W. David Jr. was the last person on the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Comanche who had to volunteer to help rescue the men who jumped into the cold Atlantic on that February 3rd morning. But when the captain asked for volunteers, he immediately responded by climbing down the rope to help save the drowning men. The Comanche was able to save 98 men, and Charles W. David Jr. played a role in saving most of them. In fact, he saved one of his own shipmates. Like chaplain assistants, he was recognized by his actions rather than by the color of his skin or his rank. I hope people who view this monument will see themselves in Charles W. David Jr. I hope people are inspired to share their talents with others and to live a life of selfless service. One last thought. When I'm not acting in my role as executive director of 4 Chaplains Memorial Foundation, I work for the Army as a civilian at Arlington National Cemetery. I escort families during their loved ones' services. In the past 4 years, I've done about 1,500 services. I've learned what separates our country from all others is how we honor our fallen. We don't forget. I conducted a service for a spouse of a Coast Guard member 7 years after his passing. He happened to serve on the Tampa, which is part of the story. Was honored to conduct a full honors for service for a Navy sailor who perished on the USS Oklahoma during the attack on Pearl Harbor, a Marine who died on the island of Iwo Jima, an Army 4-star general who served over 40 years, and an Air Force pilot who was recovered from the jungles of Vietnam. I was also honored to be part of a service in which the memorial headstone was installed for Chaplain Fox. So if you don't know, in Arlington National Cemetery, there's only 2 memorial headstones for the 2 chaplains. Rabbi Good was the first one, put in place in 1989, Chaplain Fox, and hopefully this fall the other 2 chaplains will join them. We do not forget. We bury our fallen side by side, next one up, generals next to privates, Marines next to the Army, Navy, Coast Guard, and Air Force, Christians next to Jewish soldiers, humanists, atheists, and I can go on. We serve together, we die together, and are honored together. That's what makes our nation unique. That's what makes our nation special. The Navy chaplains at Arlington National Cemetery like to say people die twice. Once when their physically body fails, and the second time when they stop saying their name. So what you're doing here is important. You have not forgotten. Your monument will help others remember. As we say in the Army Chaplain Corps, pro dea et patria, for God and country. Thank you again for inviting me here on this Memorial Day, and thanks for not forgetting.
We in York County take care of our veterans. Amen. Yep. When a few members of the 4 Chaplain Board came to me and to Cheryl Condor, who is the founder of the Gold Star Garden. By the way, we have 1,000 Gold Star families in York County since World War I. Yep. When they came to us, we actually took a walk around here, and they asked if they could put a memorial here. And at first, Sharon and I were a little protective of this area because the Gold Star Garden was Cher's dream when her son was killed in 2004. And we knew that whatever this was, it had to have the hallowed sacredness as our Gold Star Garden. So we put together a committee. It's a collaboration of the City of York. And thank you, Tom Landis is here with us today, and Scott also from the City of York. We also have almost our whole Gold Star Garden Board is here with us today. We also have the York City Parks Conservancy, and Jim Gross is here, who started that, and Kim Bracey, who started that. And then we, of course, have the four Chaplains Board. So we have been meeting since, I think the first meeting was in 2023. And one of the first people that I reached out to was Frank Dittenhaver, who helped us create this beautiful garden. This is called Veterans Memorial Project. This is phase 1. Phase 2 is going to be an enhancement to Veterans Memorial Park so that all Yorkers, everybody that visits people in York, know that York Countyans care about their veterans, because we're going to have a huge American flag out there. We're going to have new signage, and this is going to become known again, or still, as Veterans Memorial Park. At this time, and I want to thank those that are on this committee personally: Frank Dittenhaver and Harper Kavanowski, Jeff Shue with C.S. Davidson, Tom Landis with the City of York, the York City Parks Conservancy Board, Jim Gross, Nathan Leitner, president of the four Chaplains, Jody Keller, and Eric Menzer, who helped raise money. From less than 100 York County givers, we have raised over $570,000. But guess what? We still need more money. So checks can be made out to York City Parks Conservancy. I'd like to thank, there are a lot of givers here today. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. We also, the givers that are over 25,000, and we're limiting the acknowledgement when we build this. We're limiting our acknowledgement of givers to those that give 25,000 or more. And we have several of them here today: JLS Automation, Wellspan, Wareheim Foundation, Powder Mill Foundation, Chandra and Lou Appel, Dan and Tiffany Digert, Art and Lee Gladfelder Foundation, Gladfelder Insurance Group, Kinsley Family Foundation, the York City Parks Conservancy. At the same time, in-kind donations are also very important, and C.S. Davidson has given us in-kind, and of course Murphy and Dittenhafer, York Excavating, Jeff Walker and his crew. We have this wonderful piece of machinery here, of which I'm not going to get into, but we'll let the expert do that. Real Services, Patrick Sells, and Ascom Electric. If anyone else has a skill that you think we need to build this memorial as well as enhance Veterans Memorial Park, please let me know. Again, York Countyans take care of our veterans. And I'd like to, before we dig some dirt, Kevin's going to dig some dirt for us, I have a poem. I hope I can get through it. I will try to get through this. This is a thought from an American soldier. I have done things that haunt me at night. I have been away from my family so that yours can be close. I have sacrificed a lot in my life so that you may live free. I have done these things because I have sworn an oath to my country, and I will live by this oath until I die. Because I am and will always be a veteran of the United States of America. So thank you to all the veterans that are here and that will be at the service at 11. Thank you very much. Okay, so send in your checks. If you know anybody that knows anybody at DCNR, we're waiting to hear about a big grant, a $250,000 grant. But this time next year, you're going to see the Ford Chaplains Memorial where we're standing. Thank you all very much for your support.